and I'm reading our statement. The governor has declared a state of emergency due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the nature of this declared emergency makes it impracticable or unsafe for the Charlottesville Albemarle MPO, Citizens Transportation Advisory Committee to assemble in a single location. This meeting and the required public hearings will be held utilizing electronic virtual communication with the Zoom software application in accordance with virtual meeting procedures and policies as outlined in item 4.0-01 of the Virginia State Budget, HB 29, as effective April 24th, 2020. The meeting will be recorded and made available to the public at our website. All right. So that's the statement, and I'm going to go through our attendance list. So just say here if you are here. Practice unmuting yourselves. All right. So Tristan Fessel. If you could just say here, that helps. Thanks. Stuart Gardner.
Here.
Daniel Bailey is our newest member, taking over for Tim Keller, but I don't see him here. He'll probably be joining us for our next meeting because he just got appointed to CTAC. Lucas Bean.
Here.
Donna Chen. Here. Thanks, Donna. Nicholas Garber.
Yeah.
Patrick Healy.
Here.
Gary Heaton. Gary, are you here? No, okay. Joseph French.
Here.
Ray Heron.
Here.
Lee Condor.
Here.
Marty Meth.
Present.
And Travis Pietala.
Here.
All right, that's attendance. And Tristan, you can take over.
Cool. So call an order at 7:05, it seems. And manager of the public, do we have anyone here outside of ourselves?
We do not have any members of the public.
Okay, sounds good. All right, well, I believe we can move into our first agenda item, which is approval of the draft minutes from September and also November 2020. So last year's last two meetings. Does anyone have any concerns or questions before we move to vote on these? Did anyone have a chance to read through them?
I read them and I moved to approve the September meeting minutes.
Great. Anyone second?
Second.
Cool. Well, it looks like we're ready to vote then. So anyone have any kind of, do you want to say vote yes? How do you want to handle this again? I forgot how we handle it on Zoom.
So we can try it just asking everyone to say that they're in favor or against. But if it seems like we're not sure what people are saying, then we'll go person by person. I don't expect the minutes to be that controversial.
All right. So anyone, we can just vote aye. If you guys say aye, you can say aye.
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 Aye. Cool. Any nays?
I'm abstaining because I was not at that meeting.
And I am too. I was sent out at the meeting.
Sounds good. Yeah, I abstained from November as well. I wasn't here for that, but September, yes. All right. Sounds like it goes through though, Jessica.
It does. And I just wanted to note that Chip has just joined us. So if we could give him a minute right now just to chat with the group. Chip, just in case you didn't want to stick around for the whole meeting.
I never know which way to look on these things. I look at the pictures, but my camera's over there. Yeah, I know. I do want to hang around. This will be my last meeting, and I've really enjoyed, of course, working with everybody and all the CTAC members before. I'm hoping. I mean, if you haven't seen it already, boy, this is a great way to kind of go out. Our region did really well with Smart Scale this year. $117 million worth of improvements have been recommended. So it's a big time. You take that along with the money that was committed to the Route 29 projects. I mean, we're 220, 320. We're about $500 million worth of projects since the beginning of Smart Scale. So really good. I'm a hang around so that perhaps we can talk about that. If there are any questions, there were some real surprises. I'll be honest, I think I have said it to you all. I said it at meetings as recently as Monday that I felt there was absolutely no way the Fontaine and 250 bypass project would be awarded, and we would be considering that for a future project. Boy, was I wrong. So it ranked high up there. It has been recommended for funding. So there's very little chance that it will not get through the full approval process and approved by the Commonwealth Transportation Board. So I do think your work is cut out for you in helping to come up with projects and deciding which of those should be, or helping the policy board decide which of those should be priority projects to spend a good bit of citizen engagement on. I've got the list in front of me. I've always kind of recommended that the first place to start would be the projects that didn't get recommended. One of those, especially the representatives from Albemarle County, you may be familiar with the 29 and Frays Mill Road. It was a proposed R-cut, very controversial with some of the neighborhoods around it. That was not recommended for funding. Another big project I was sorry to see was not recommended was the Hillsdale South, which would have connected Hillsdale from hydraulic to the 250 bypass. That was also not recommended for funding. So, there's a couple of ideas that you all may start talking about and consider to put forward for projects for the next round, where the applications will be due not this August, but next August. So anyway, it's been a pleasure. I'm a hang around here until it looks like I'm not needed. And but I'd be glad to answer any questions or talk about anything you'd like.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
All right, great. Well, smooth sailings to you, sir. If we're not, are we waiting for anything else, Jessica, before we get into the tip amendment?
Nope, you can go right into the next agenda item.
All right, sounds good. So, Lucinda, it looks like we got this tip adjustment memo to look through.
Yep, let me share my screen. Get the right one. So you should see the amendment to the Transportation Improvement Program. And this is one amendment. It's an increase in cost. It's for the Route 20 Belmont Bridge replacement. And they're increasing the cost from 25.187 million to 31.1 million. The new tip block is on the screen, and then the old tip block is here. This project has already been advertised, so we really need the policy board to approve it. And I'm asking that you recommend that the policy board approve the amendment. Are there any questions?
I was going to ask, is there a reason for the big $5-6 million jump?
I don't know, I'll give my answer, and if Chuck wants to jump in, or Chip, and correct me if I'm wrong. I think that with COVID, a lot of the materials for construction have been limited, and the supply chain is limited, and so cost of construction is going up all over the place. So that, I think it's a result of that.
I guess just a follow, because of that, does that affect any other projects in the tip, or is this somehow additional?
We'll have to find out. I know that another project that's not in the tip is increasing the construction cost increase for that. So we haven't heard of any others, but it could be possible. Yeah.
Lucinda, I'm not sure, if this is accurate or not, but I do know that this was a project funded prior to Smart Scale. So I don't think that any additional funding going to this project will take away from any of the other projects that had been submitted. The other thing I'm thinking is that, as you all know, there's the new gas tax that has been implemented within the Commonwealth. A lot of additional revenue has been generated with that. And that is, in fact, one of the reasons we received more projects than we anticipated for our region. Culpeper District received an additional $80+ million than what had been originally estimated for our district. With that extra money, I'm thinking that money is being put to these high priority projects like this without it having to come from other projects.
Yeah, in the tech meeting, Chuck indicated that this money was coming from the state and other sources, and it didn't seem like there was going to be a transfer. It was just additional money.
Can you confirm the timing of this project if the rationale for the increase has to do with COVID and prices going up?
So it's out to bid right now. I imagine it would start in the spring. I don't know. Yeah.
Any other questions for Lucinda? Great. We willing to bring this for a vote? Anyone second that?
Second it.
Great. All right. So let's vote. For the recommendation of this tip adjustment, everyone can just say aye, and I'll listen, and we'll go to nays next. So if you vote yes, please say yay.
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 All right, great.
Yay.
Thank you. Anyone say no or nay?
I'm going to say nay.
All right. Well, it looks like the yeses have it. Do we want to take a comment from Joe on this?
Sure.
You able to take that?
I think with I think just like asking for an additional $6 million without providing what it would be for, and then also doing it, it feels a little rushed it feels a little rushed. Also, if it's already been advertised at the price that it's been at, I don't know. I don't feel good about it.
Okay. All right. So I think with that, anything else we'd like to discuss before we move on to the next agenda item? And thanks, Joe, for that. I am trying to find the agenda. I have too many screens. If you guys saw how many screens, you think I was in the Matrix. That's the architect. I have 6 in here. Okay, cool. All right. I think we just got through that. So Lucinda, I think we're now to the performance and safety targets.
Yeah. Yep. Let me pull up that memo. So you should see a memo saying the topic setting performance targets. In our last meeting, we had some presentations from OP, and we had a discussion about the performance targets that the MPO needs to set for the state for their performance measurement program. And after some consideration and discussion, the staff decided to recommend that the MPO adopt the state targets. We don't really have a lot of mechanism for changing the performance measures, and we thought that it was better to just go with what the state is having because they have more control over the outcomes of the performance of the assets being measured. The one thing that was brought up in the tech committee is that the So in the memo, I have first two tables are the recommended targets, and the targets that we would report to the state are the very last column, the CA MPO targets for 2021. So the one thing that was brought up in the tech committee meeting is that the safety performance targets is the MPO area projected trend is very different from the state target. And we had a lengthy discussion about this in the tech committee meeting. And I don't know if Chuck is on the meeting tonight, but the trend is going up. So it looks like we have, a decrease, our trend is decreasing, but actually if you look at the 5-year indicator, it will be going up according to the data. And also, if you look at the number of fatalities, like the actual number of data that's being measured, like 898 deaths, if there's like one more or less death, it's not going to change that trend that much, that target. But with 7 deaths, if it changes by 1 or 2, it's going to make a much larger percentage increase. So the MPO Tech Committee felt like they could recommend going with the state targets for this, but there was a discussion, and it's just a suggestion from the staff, and I'm perfectly happy if you want to do something different than what is recommended. I do have the tables, the table 3 and 4 are alternatives, and I just filled them in with the trends. And also you could decide to make a recommendation to do something other than the trend numbers as well.
May I make a comment here, please? Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering whether this way that, for instance, the number of fatalities is just giving total. In really planning any project or looking at the maintenance of a particular facility, something that is important is the number of fatalities involving trucks with regards to ordinary passenger cars. From this performance target here, there is nothing that tells me about the difference of the involvement of trucks with respect to other types of vehicles. I feel that, I'm not asking us not to support it now, but I feel that we should recommend to whoever is responsible to see whether that information can be included rather than just a total number of fatalities.
I imagine that VDOT does have that information, and if you would like, I can get it for you and send it to you after the meeting.
I would like, please.
Okay.
Lucinda, one other thing that might be helpful to mention is how MPO Tech voted and their recommendation.
Yeah, thanks. MPO Tech voted to recommend that the MPO Policy Board adopt the state targets for all of the targets.
So there would be no difference between the MPO that we have and the state targets? It would just be the exact same?
Yes, that is correct.
Which of the tables reflects that? Was that the first one you showed?
Yeah, it's the
Okay.
first two. These two here.
Yeah, and be aware that if you don't use the state targets, then you have to provide a justification for what you do.
Yes, so there would be no financial ramifications if we set our own targets and we did not meet the targets, we wouldn't be penalized. However, MPO staff would have to explain to MPO and FTA why we didn't meet our targets and what we were going to do in order to meet the targets. And that's where I kind of realized that it was better to stay with the state targets, because the only things that we could really do to meet those targets and make a substantial change would be in our prioritization of our transportation projects in the long range transportation plan, and also in our prioritization of our smart scale applications. The state has a lot more like say in what projects they're going to fund and select for funding. So it just seemed like the state has more control over the results and, you know, the performance than the MPO does.
In some cases, we seem to be doing better than our targets, much better than our targets. Now we're dropping down again. And why does that make sense? If we're doing much better, why don't we hold to the higher targets or closer to what we're actually achieving?
Yeah, that was my exact question when I started on this whole quest of kind of learning more about the targets and the performance measures. So there's actually in your packet, I think Jessica included it, there's an overview of the performance measures and safety targets. And that kind of goes into more depth about how they were created and how they work. So this system comes from the federal government, and then it goes through the state, and it's tailored to a system. Well, the state, and it's made so that the state and the MPO work together on the targets. So the MPO is kind of working with the state, and the state's taking the lead and saying, these are the targets that we want to meet and reach. And the MPO is supporting that. So it just kind of, the way the system works, we don't really have any like way to substantially influence the outcomes. It's more in the state system. So it's better for us to just go with the state system. However, I'm happy to not, you know, if you want to make a recommendation to adjust our own targets, we can do that.
I just wanted to ask. Sorry, Marty, were you still talking?
I think if you chose to set your own targets and, you know, make the fatalities lower, you know, and kind of aim towards less fatalities and accidents, that would be kind of a gesture and kind of a statement, which would be fine. But it's not going to change any funding.
So I had a question. I get with fatalities that, you know, 1 or 2 fatalities can totally change everything. But I was going to ask about on this slide we're looking at now, that top box with the person miles traveled that are reliable. And that also seemed like one where our actual is well above the state targets. And I was just wondering if that's another one where you think where the trend is showing it actually should be lower, or just what the reason was for that one being lowered too.
I know why, because of Northern Virginia, and I'm not sure if there is a reason why we would expect our area's targets to predict that they are lower. I think another thing is that what this is measuring here is the trend of how the data is moving, but when the state looks and sets their targets, they're also looking at the projects that they're planning to fund and implement in the upcoming years. So they're not only looking at the trend, but they're also looking at what they're doing to affect the change.
And just on that one, I guess I'd ask the follow-up question. So like on that first one, the person miles traveled on the interstate, it looks like the MPO's current target is 99%. And so even from our own target, it looks like we'd be dropping down 17%.
Yeah, so the MPO did decide to change some of the targets 2 years ago. That one was changed 2 years ago. And because there was a construction project that was going to, that we thought was going to make it more favorable, you know, increase the reliability. I don't think that, well, maybe it did happen. I don't know. So that was that's not in the picture anymore. And our state representative recommended that we just adopt their state targets.
Cinda, if I could tack on, for me, it was really helpful, some stuff that Chuck said at our MPO tech meeting. And Chuck, I saw that you jumped on the call. So if I'm misrepresenting what you said, please jump in. But Chuck said something like, these targets are a really useful exercise for us to understand our performance, but they are not goal setting. So they are projections. So we should treat whatever we're looking at as projections based on data and not our goals. So if we see things like the percent change in fatalities, our target is an increase, we can confidently say that that's not our goal, that's just the projection. So just putting that in your minds that when you vote to make your recommendation for these things, you're not saying that these are the goals of the MPO, these are the projections of the MPO based on the data. So I think that kind of, I don't know, it relaxes me thinking about what the recommendation would be. So I hope that might be helpful to you guys as you're thinking this through.
Jessica, how does then the goals get communicated if they're separate from the targets?
No, that's a great question. And it's really completely a separate process. That would be our long range transportation planning process. Like Lucinda was saying about prioritizing our projects. That's where we prioritize our projects, and our projects are prioritized based on whatever criteria are most important to us in our region. So if safety is our most important thing, that's how we're going to prioritize our projects. We're going to say that the projects that improve safety the most or are expected to improve safety the most, those are the ones we want to do first whenever we have funding available to do them.
Will we also measure it against some of these targets? The projects? Has it done in the past? I guess is my question. Has that been something standard or not?
So this system was implemented a few years ago, and it was right around the time that our long-range transportation plan was being updated. So I think it was a part of it, but I think that our next update in the future can include more of it. And the state does, and the localities also prioritize safety as the first goal for their funding selections. So like us, they're also very concerned about that. And I think that the penalties are the highest if the safety goals are not met through the federal system. So that would be something. And also we're going to be setting the safety targets every year. The asset and system condition targets are measured every 4 years with the 2-year adjustment, but the safety performance targets are set every year. So this is something that we can discuss in our committees and kind of as a group together as a community. It's a really good opportunity for us to have awareness of it and awareness of the trends, and then, kind of have discussions about it. But as far as reporting to the state, this is kind of a state request. It's their system, and they've asked us to kind of set these targets.
I have a quick question. So here it seems like, the state targets are probably average across the state. And of course, that includes many different kinds of land use areas. Like you mentioned, for example, for the reliability measure, Charlottesville is not Northern Virginia. Here we're saying that our current target for travel time reliability index was 1.2 and the actual was 1.15, but we're setting our target at 1.56. It seems sort of strange to take the state average of something that does not describe the local condition. And I would think it's the same for the safety performance targets. We're a town that has, for example, higher bicycle use share than the state average, and probably more pedestrians because of how dense it is in the center part of Charlottesville compared to other places. And I see that for the number of non-motorized fatalities, serious injuries, it looks like we just took the CAMPO projected trend, since that was a number, but for the other ones, we're adopting the state. It's just it seems kind of arbitrary that we're taking these numbers. And if the exercise is somewhat arbitrary, like we just take the state average and apply it towards the local targets, then it's sort of working against the goal of working with the state to set these targets. I mean, I don't understand how that part works.
Um,
You want me to
I-
take a stab at this? Lucinda?
yeah.
Yeah, this is
Mhm.
Chuck Proctor. Especially for the safety targets, since we had the recession back in the late, like 2008, 2009, we saw a downward trend through like 2014 through 2015, and we're starting to see that trend start to rise up. And the way the data is calculated, it's based on a 5-year running average. And the average for us is still trending downward, even though the data points are going upward at the last few years. So the downward trend part hasn't flushed itself out, so to speak. And what we're going to see probably either next year or the following year, it will see a big jump upwards in the trend. And that's just the way the data is showing. This chart here doesn't show that, but if you look at the actual 5-year running data trend and the individual year data trend, it's basically U-shaped. And we're on the upward side of that U. We just haven't, the 5-year trend hasn't caught up with us yet. So that is why
I understand what you're saying about the trend lines. And of course, the trends will change in 2020 because COVID, impacted travel in very unexpected ways. You probably will have much more reliable travel times for big chunks of 2020, for example. And I understand that there are trend lines and that's how these targets are projected. So my question is, what is the purpose of setting the local targets if they're just going to be interpreted directly from state average trend lines? Like, are these targets or are these just projections?
It's as part of the regulations that as the federal government, as part of the regulations, the MPO have to set targets as well as the state. The way we don't necessarily roll up what the MPOs propose in the state targets, we go with whatever the trends are showing statewide. And we're assessed impacts from the federal government based on the state numbers, not the MPO numbers. So it doesn't really affect the MPO other than it shows you where you're trending. And if you want to pursue something, and we do, our numbers are low and we pursue most of our projects pretty much all of our projects that we pursue have a high safety component. And we're trying to address most of those needs. The system reliability that one's a little bit harder to do because a lot of times you're going to have to do capacity improvements to address some of those needs. And we haven't really done those in a long time in this region. So I don't see that happening, but we do look at the operation perspective and try to provide as much operational benefit as we can, as well as diversion to other modes. And that's what the MPO, their policy and their processes is trying to facilitate that shift as opposed to putting more roads out there, which hopefully eventually it'll start to reflect more in the data. But we're not seeing that necessarily in the data per se.
Donna, did that help you? Were there any other questions?
Yeah, I think it's more clear. But so, for example, let's just say for the safety performance targets, instead of setting them at the state target, we just went with the Campo projected trend. How would that come back and hurt the MPO? Would there be any way?
Well, it's just a matter of justifying it with data. And you've got, other than the data that we've sent as part of the workbook, unless the MPO is going to collect their own data and provide and do that piece of it, we don't necessarily have the.
So it says right here, MPO projected trend 2021 is negative 4.3% for a percentage change in fatalities. So that number comes from some data.
That's the data that we provided them in the workbook.
Right. So why would that, so the local projected trend, why would that not be adopted as the target instead of the state target?
I mean, it can be. The issue is going to be is how do you support that other than this data? And yeah, that could be something that the MPO could opt to do that.
What is
Do
the
you feel like you need
ramification?
more than this data to support that? I mean, it seems like having the data that says it is kind of the best support you could.
Well, you got to show how your projects and that you're selecting and pursuing are going to support that trend. If you do the state trend, if you adopt the state targets, we have that supporting data already. If you want to do your own targets, then you have to come up with what you're going to do to justify this downward trend from a project, what projects you're going to pursue and how you're going to continue to pursue that. And it's coming up with that documentation.
Stuart, were you about to say something?
Yes, I'm curious, what are the ramifications for not achieving the target? Or are there any?
For
Is it just
for the state, there are ramifications. That's why they give us a 2-year, we can reset it every 2 years to adjust it so that we can try to keep track. But if we consistently don't meet targets, like for safety, they could basically say, you need to take all of your federal dollars and put it on addressing safety needs, and you need to show us how you're doing it. So we lose the flexibility with how we're applying our funds across the board.
So if we're aggressive, or let's say, we wanted them to have higher level targets, we might shoot ourselves in the foot. Is that what I'm hearing?
You won't shoot yourself in the foot because it's all based on the state.
Oh, okay. So the MPO would not be judged at that level. It would be the state.
Yes.
So I guess to boil it down, it seems like if we go with the state targets, the main value of this whole exercise is basically just to compare how we're doing against the statewide average, rather than it actually reflecting like the goals of our MPO. Is that fair?
Yes. Yeah.
And I would say, or even the trends of our MPO, not even the goals.
Well, I mean, hopefully with the next update for the long range plan, we can take a deeper dive, because these came out about the same time we adopted the last long range plan. So we weren't able to really mill them into the process developing the long range plan. The MPO did have a process, and they've had one for several years where they set up goals and prioritized and evaluated all the projects based on a prioritization system that they had developed. And that's one of the things that they actually got national accolades for about doing that. And they did it through a federal grant program initially, like 10 years ago. So I think this round, given this information, I think we can do a lot better job integrating these goals, or developing goals that reflect what the aspirations are and that can help address what you're trying to do with these trends and support those.
So quick question. Oh, go ahead, John. Don?
Sorry, just one more comment. So my concern is if we set the local targets at the state average, knowing that for the majority of the safety performance targets, our trends would be to beat the performance, the state targets anyway, right? So let's say we set it at 3.2% and then we actually see a decrease as it's shown on the first line of that safety performance target. So on paper, it's going to look like we did great in terms of maintaining our goal of keeping fatalities under 3.2% increase. But in reality, right, like if the projected trend is, true, taking our own local data, we may actually be inadvertently increasing the number of local fatalities that would be more context specific to this community. So like, it's gonna look like we did good on paper, but like in reality, that's not good considering the local context. I guess that's my concern. And I don't know if there is any implication for what I just said beyond sort of this paperwork exercise we're doing here.
So
not that I'm aware of.
I had the exact same concern, and I've done a lot of research and discussions, meetings on this, because I thought, well, we should keep our standards high. We have high scores right now. We have good trends. Why would we set our goals lower? However, this is an exercise to meet a federal requirement. That's why we're setting these targets, because it's required by the federal government. And the funding and the selection of transportation projects goes through the state. So there is not a lot that the MPO is going to do to change the outcomes. It's all kind of in the state's hands. They have control over most of it. So, the two things that we can do are our selection of our smart scale projects and our that we apply to the state for, and our prioritization in our long range transportation plan. However, it's not going to make that much of an impact in these annual trends. So it just seemed like it was better to go along with the state targets. It's a state system. And also, if we choose our own targets, we have to come up with a plan to make changes and, of how we're going to meet those targets. And there's not a lot of resources for the MPO to do that.
So, Lucinda, if I could just, and Chuck, I think the question was more, where are we going to see these targets and our performance outcomes again? Are we only going to see them when we revise this in 4 years, or does the state use it for anything else in determining how funding is allocated or anything like that? Like, when is it used again? Is that your question, Donna?
Yeah, it's related. Yep.
So the asset and system condition targets are done the MPO has to update them every 4 years. There's an opportunity to make adjustments every 2 years. If the state chooses to make adjustments, the MPO can also make adjustments. So we will see those every 4, possibly 2 years. And then the safety and performance targets are every year. The MPO will be asked to update their targets. We have a workbook which is on our website, and I can pull it up if you guys want to see it now, that just shows the trend and the data. When we revisit these next year, we can look at the trend and where it's going and see what's happening within our community for these targets.
So one last point, sorry, this discussion's going on a bit. It also, I guess, seems like you're saying for these particular targets, they're set at the state level, it's tough for the MPO to do much to change them. So this might not be the best kind of exercise for the MPO to set its own targets that it really wants to work towards meeting. Is there like a separate process, like as part of the long range plan, where the MPO is planning to kind of set its own targets, maybe wouldn't have the same consequences involved, but could be more like promising routes to actually work towards meeting our actual goals rather than just state average?
Yeah, so the long range transportation plan is where we would be able to do that. the MPO and we'll do public outreach, and the community will decide on the goals and how to prioritize the transportation projects and needs within the long-range transportation plan. And then those go into the TIP, which is what we just amended, and then that will go to the state, and the state will put that in their state plan. So that is where the MPO is able to have some kind of control over the outcomes. And then also in the selection of our smart scale projects. So we do both of those, the smart scale projects and the long range transportation plan, in coordination with the state. And I believe, I mean, I can't speak for the community at this point, but it's the staff's intention, and I believe VDOT's intention as well, when we redo our long range transportation plan, to use these targets as a measurement and, you know, work towards having them, you know, reaching them and having them be better. So, I mean, the long range transportation plan will have a lot of community input. So I can't, you know, speak for what the community decides to do, but we're hoping that we will continue to work with these measures and this performance measurement system.
I feel like if we ever reference this document for internal use inside of our MPO, then we should stick with our trends and our data.
I think that, I mean, if we have a discussion about this, we will definitely. Go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, I was going to say that's, I mean, I've heard that through many of the meetings about how we can use this data, and that's been the process that we want to try to strive to do, is to track the trends and look at the projects that we're doing and see, make sure that they're going to continue to address the trends in the way we want them addressed. And that's what we, at least from my perspective, when working with the localities in the MPO, I try to make sure that we're looking at the projects that are going to have the best safety benefit, and include all of the impacts that it'll have on all the different modes. So it's just not measured by vehicle. It's looking at how the pedestrians are crossing the street and maneuvering through an intersection and bicyclists. And those are going to keep the trends in the direction we want them to go. And that's coordination between this committee, the other committees in the MPO, and the adjacent localities that make up the MPO. And hopefully we can, as part of the long range plan update, we can tease out these methods for identifying and evaluating projects, and incorporate them into our evaluation process for the long range plan development.
This is Stuart. When I think of a projected trend, I think that's kind of the what's going to happen, the baseline, the do nothing scenario. And I think if we have a target that's above that, that almost sends the wrong message. Where I can understand if we had a target that was below the trend, we would need to justify what are we doing to somehow affect the do nothing scenario, the trend line. But where we have, I think what concerns a lot of people on this group, without having said it yet, is, under safety performance targets, that second row, we're basically saying we're okay with the number higher than the projected trend line. And why would we be okay with that? I can understand if our target was below that, we would need to say, all right, we're going to do projects 1, 2, and 3 to really drive that number down. But if we're saying that's a projected trend, just given current steady state, why would not all the targets be the same as the trend?
So I think that there's been a lot of good discussion and some good questions. We are a little over 10 minutes over our allotted time for this agenda item. Perhaps it might be time for someone to make a motion. It just seems like you guys are all kind of coalescing around one idea, and it might be beneficial to wrap it up with a motion and maybe even take a vote.
So are we looking
Before,
for here,
before we make
Lucinda,
a
are we looking
motion,
for a recommendation for this to move forward?
can I make a
or-
comment before making a motion, please? I just want to know what facility does the MPO have to extract own data? Because the data is available, but it needs money and personnel for that data to be extracted. So what facilities does the MPO have for that type of work?
I'd like to hand that question off to Sandy. Sandy, are you better informed than I am about that?
I'm sorry, you broke up just a little bit. What capacity does the PDC have to extract data? Was that the question?
Yes, I said what capacity does MPO have? Does a particular MPO have to extract the data for that data to be analyzed in the proper way for us to be able to do a good projection?
Yeah, we have the same access to data that, I mean, we would get it through VDOT or, you know, one of the modeling companies that they have a contract with. We have the same access to the data that they would have. We don't have transportation modelers or, you know, statisticians or anybody like that on our staff there that would be able to do any additional statistical analysis beyond what the state has done at this point. That's something that would certainly be incorporated into the long range transportation planning process, but it's not something that we have typically, you know, utilized for something like this.
Well, in that case, I cannot see how we can get individual MPOs information. You know, the data is not. The data is available, but it's not available to those who are making the projection. So I think we have to think about that.
We do have the data, and it is on our website. I'm going to share it with you. The state provides us with the data. So we have this workbook here that has all of the data for our MPO. And so this we have two workbooks. One is for the safety targets and the other one is for the performance targets. And so, you know, you can see here, they have the charts with the trends and they have some graphs, and then it's broken up into the MPO regular vehicle data, and then there's a tab for the pet and bike data as well.
But the problem here is that I don't see how you can just use a trend line to predict, because for instance, the serious accidents that we're looking at, if at a particular year we find out that a particular location, because of an intersection, the process is much higher, you'll find that if you do something to reduce the crash on that particular intersection, the crash rates will reduce considerably. But if you don't do anything, it may increase. So I don't see anything in the input here, because apparently I don't know anything about what you do in how you get to the long range planning, because projects, different type of projects have impacts on safety. So it depends on the type of project that is planned for in the long-term period that you can use to project that if I do this project, because of the type of project, it would have this impact, and this is where we have the reduction. But without doing that type of analysis, maybe they are doing it, but it does not show here the analysis is being done. And that's what bothers me here.
So VDOT is doing that for us. Chuck,
VDOT,
I don't know if you...
Okay, but for statewide.
They do it for our district.
Oh, okay.
They do, yeah, they do. That's Charles Proctor, who's on the call. He works with us, and you know, Virginia is broken up into different districts. So we have the Culpeper district where we have our own planners through, you know, VDOT, and they do all of this data and simulation for us.
Well, which means that data is there, it can be analyzed. It's just a presentation.
Well, this is the workbook represents the analysis that they do in central office for all the MPOs and for the state across the entire state. And these are basically what we're showing in the charts up there, where the data points are showing. And as you can see, the fatalities, the last 3 years, it's been pretty flat. The serious injuries, as you can see, it's starting to trend upward. So if you take a minus 16% trend, the next round, the trend line is probably going to start to rise up. And that's what I was trying to say before. What we're seeing, even with COVID, over the state, we've seen an increase in crashes, serious injury and fatal crashes over what we saw last year prior to COVID, which was it's about a 5% increase over what we saw last year. I'm waiting for the data to come out, but that's what we were looking at before when they did the presentation to the MPO back in December.
Yes, but what I'm saying, I'm sorry, I don't want to extend this. What I'm saying, if for instance, take the last part, if during that period, 2 major projects are approved and constructed with impact safety, it will not continue to rise. It may significantly drop. Or we're showing average line now going down. If nothing is done, who knows? It could go up.
You're correct. And even the effects of the project, you're not going to see them right away. You won't see the reflex until 3 or 4 years out.
This is true.
On the trends itself. And that's why I'm saying is we want to try to pursue the projects that are going to address the issues. But I mean, what these numbers say for us, for the MPO, it doesn't really have any weight, or other than being something that we're having to check off to address the federal regulations. It doesn't have any impact on what we do as an MPO.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That clarifies the situation now.
And I'm hoping that and we do. We look at and we evaluate the projects, and we pursue projects that are going to address these needs in most of our applications that we're submitting for funding. We look at where we're having the hot spots throughout the district, and those are the ones we present to the localities to see if they want to pursue those locations to make those improvements. And some of them we get funded, some of them don't. This year fortunately we were able to get a number of projects funded. So moving forward, but even if we get it funded now, it's going to be 5 or 6 years before they're completed. So we're not going to see that effect on the safety data for 7 or 8 years, possibly.
Do you feel like that answered your question?
Yes, it does now.
Great.
I can understand it better, because the first way it was presented, no impact of the project shown at all, of any projects.
So at this point, we are more than 20 minutes over. I'm saying this to everybody. So you can choose to either make a motion and vote, or you do not need to vote. We can gather up all of your thoughts over over the course of this agenda item and bring it to the policy board as a summary. But I want to give you guys the option now to wrap it up in whatever way makes the most sense for you.
I'm willing to make a motion to just accept the state targets because there really isn't any real alternative to that. We might as well just do it. So that's
I second it. All right, so it looks like a second. So we're ready to then vote. So who says yay?
Yay.
Yay.
Yay. Anyone say nay to this or abstain?
I'll abstain from voting. I still don't fully understand.
I'll abstain for the same reason.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna abstain.
All right, 4 abstains.
Person by person, actually.
Okay, well, I say yay. Ada, what do you say?
Actually, Joseph.
Joseph? Can you guys hear me?
Sorry, yes, I also abstained.
Abstained. And Ada? Ada, how do you vote?
I think that's his wife's computer.
Oh, what's his
that's
name?
Nicholas.
Nicholas, thank you. Nicholas, what do you vote?
I would vote for the, after the explanation, I would vote yes.
So is that a abstain then?
I believe he's in favor of the motion.
Oh, he's in favor. Okay, thank you. And Lee?
Yes.
Cool. Marty?
Yes.
Ray?
Yes.
Travis? You were.
Abstain.
Thank you. And Patrick?
Yes.
And Donna?
Abstain.
Thank you. Lucas?
Abstain.
Joseph, I think we got you, right?
Yeah, abstain.
Thank you, sir. And Stuart?
Yes.
Thank you. And then is Christine?
No, she is not a voting member. She's
Thank
our,
you.
our interim director to be.
Got it. All right, thanks. Well, that's everyone.
I would like to make a suggestion that maybe in the minutes or something, we should state that maybe these graphs should be presented in another way that reflects what is happening in our district. Because as I said, it does not reflect what's happening in our district at all. If the data is there, I think we should be receiving that type of analysis rather than looking just at the state. I would make that recommendation.
Thank you, Nicholas. All right. So it looks like we should be able to move to the fifth item here is Unified Planning of Work Program. Sandy, I believe
Yep.
this is with you.
Yep, I am going to, let's see, share my screen with you now. So we're just playing all kinds of crush your fingers and hope it works games to make sure the technology is working. So first of all, I apologize for not getting this out to you ahead of time. Jessica is going to email this out to you all. What I want to make sure that you all know of first and foremost is that we're not asking for any decisions tonight. This is just to start a discussion. As many of you know, every fiscal year we are required to submit a unified planning work program, which basically outlines how we are going to spend the federal planning money that is given to us for the MPO operations in terms of supporting transportation planning throughout the region, specifically through the MPO boundaries. So we wanted to start early having a discussion with you all in developing the work program. One of the things we learned from some of the changes that VDOT has made as far as their invoice and record keeping protocol, as well as this just being the first year that I've put together a work program and we have a lot of new staff, is that we're really going to be able to serve our MPO area better if we simplify and streamline the number of projects that we put into the work program. So there are several things that we're required to do. We talked about the TIP, we talked about the performance targets and the safety targets. Those are things that we have to do. We have to staff committees. We have to, communicate with other jurisdictions to coordinate with them. We want to, hearing what you all have said, public outreach is really important. We want to make sure that we do that well and support this committee as well as our other MPO committees. So those are all things that are just going to be kind of standard in all of the work programs. And then we have some additional ability to do projects outside of those specific have to do items that will support work for transportation planning in the region. This fiscal year, we are launching the Route 29 North Corridor study. That's in both the MPO work program for fiscal year 21, as well as the rural work program. So in order to make sure that that project is completed, we'll need to continue that into fiscal year 22. So that's going to be one of our larger larger projects that will need a good amount of staff resources. We've also been talking about, as you all are aware, of expanding the smart scale public engagement process and project selection process. And so we're going to be committing quite a bit of resources to that too. In addition to those two items, we are also recommending that the MPO use a consultant to do a strategic plan for the MPO. And we think this is really important, especially as we prepare for potentially a redistricting of the MPO boundaries, so that we can define really what the purpose of the MPO is, as far as who does the MPO consider to be its clients? Who are we working for? Is that county staff? Is it public officials? Is it citizens? To really define who it is that we need to be making sure that we're engaging, and who our stakeholders are, and to really make sure that that's clarified, as well as better defining our committee structure and the roles and responsibilities of each of the committees. We think this will set us up really well as we prepare for a redistricting to be really well organized, have a clear sense of purpose, just be able to better define and be more intentional about the work that we undertake. All of that being accounted for, we still have a little bit of unallocated resource. And that's what we really want to talk to you all about. First of all, if there's any sort of concern about that other work that I just mentioned, specifically a strategic plan, that's certainly on the table and we can talk about it. But we also do have a little bit of additional resources. We think we can do one more project pretty well. And so Jessica, Lucinda, and I brainstormed. We had a couple of ideas. You all might have others as well, but we just wanted to get some feedback from you all on what you think would be the best use of the MPO staff and time that would be of interest and would benefit the community. So we first started off with looking at a couple of different categories. We started with policy research, which is sort of where the transportation funding analysis started. So we could do some ideas that we had under a policy topic would be to look at some case studies in depth on successful public-private partnerships where we could leverage private investment into transportation infrastructure to try to find ways to fund bigger projects, best practices for supporting climate action plans. And then studying how this rise in telework that we're seeing kind of as a result of the pandemic that we expect will continue to impact sort of commuting patterns and how people get to work and how people work, how those might impact ongoing travel demand and travel behavior. Those were a couple of ideas we had kind of in that policy research category. Then we have a bike ped sort of overall topic, nothing super specific as far as sub topics for that, but that's something that we have continued to support and could very easily come up with a project. Another phase of some sort of equity work. This one was the one that seemed to have the most interest from the MPO Tech Committee. And then Lucinda especially has been doing a lot of research into understanding some of the safety, and I think this probably relates to equity as well. One idea we had was to spend a little bit of time and effort understanding the relationship between safety outcomes and the impacts or correlations between who's getting hurt, where they're getting hurt, and who those populations of people that are likely to experience negative safety impacts. What are those demographics and how does that impact specifically historically underserved communities? So those are a couple places to start. Really, we want to hear, this is just a time for you guys to share your ideas. Are any of these interesting to you? Do you have other suggestions? And then we'll take your feedback, MPO Tech's feedback, bring it to the policy board, and we'll work from there to, start building our work program for fiscal year 22.
Oh, I would like to, I'll throw the first stone. I'd like to advocate for a focus on buses.
Buses?
Yes. Public transportation, maybe saying it better. In particular, you know, the county has been pushing on affordable housing and spreading it throughout the county. Part of making that work, for example, is to have transportation available to people who may not have cars. Then there's also aging in place, of which I'm one. So that too, it would be helpful to have bus transportation. I know the bus transportation in my neighborhood, a bus sort of runs once every hour and is very limited. If you wanted to get around the county, it's very hard. So I'd like to see really a look at how we can expand the bus transportation. Now, I know this Jaunt had briefed us, and I think briefed CTAC about non-fixed routes. That might be part of it. That's maybe a little bit more pie in the sky, but at least with the buses that we have, I think we could do more. Maybe we could buy different size buses to expand the availability of buses over time. And so I think it would be an interesting area to study and have some payoff for the county and the city.
Mr. If I could go ahead just real quickly, I think it's later on the agenda, if I'm not mistaken. I don't have it up in front of me. Our area is the recipient of currently CAT, Charlottesville Area Transit, has a consultant that's looking at the actual bus routes to redesign their entire system. At the same time, the Thomas Jefferson Planning District is the recipient of 2 other transit planning grants. One is for a regional visioning process, which, Martin, it sounds like just what you're talking about is a complete upper level view of what's needed, where it's needed, and what is the best method to fill the need. That particular study won't say that a bus, a 40-foot bus has to run down Elm Street, but it'll pick a neighborhood and determine the economic status and the work and you know, where people travel to and from that neighborhood, and determine this is a neighborhood we need to run through and others that are not. We have been awarded that project, and Jessica is working on kicking that off right now. We also receive funding at the same time for a project that we're managing for Albemarle County that will look at the specific routes on North 29, on Pantops, and running to Monticello. Those were 3 identified areas that may be, the outcome could be expansion of CAT, it could be an expansion service by Jaunt, or it could be some type of on-demand service. So I don't want to discourage your recommendation, but there's going to be a tremendous amount of work in the next 18 months on those very issues.
So, but the only thing I would say is if you've got 3 separate projects, maybe it pays for the MPO to somehow draw them all together so that we have a more of a, not have each one in its own little pipeline. They should be feeding each other. The other thing I'm going to say is just one last thing, then I'll let somebody else speak, is that I'm very sensitive to the fact that the county, Albemarle County, where I live, has been pushing on a lot of rentals and affordable housing. And so when these studies are taking place, are they taking into account the number of projects that are in place?
Muted yourself, Marty. Marty.
Oh, yeah, I got it. I'm sorry. So my question is that, did you hear at the beginning that these 3 projects shouldn't be silos, they have to somehow be integrated? That I didn't get from what you said, Chip. And the other thing is that are we taking into account all the project building that's going on in the county and probably in the city? Is that going to be part of the study to look 5 years out, so they take all of that into account, plus the different population mixes?
Yes, we'll look at land use, both current density and projected future density in the visioning process.
Okay.
The answer to your first question is, while they're all three separate projects with separate scopes of work, what we're looking to do is to hire the same consultant to do all three, so that we have that commonality of what you're saying, so that one person can see from all three different projects.
Okay.
And we're working with DRPT on that.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Great.
Sandy, I wanted to propose one idea, ride sharing economy, some kind of consideration or possible study to consider around. I've seen other communities have places in which people who are looking to like hail an Uber or a Lyft or whatever, some communities come up with for ways to, encompass that within the design of their streets and the shape of how their communities look. So that's just one idea to consider.
Like kind of like best practices for how to support.
Yeah. There's different ways, right? Like you could have like a taxi cab stand, or you could have it for ride shares or anything kind of like that. If it's something of demand or something of interest to you all, you think it would be useful.
Cool.
Yeah, this is Stuart. I think it's great that we're thinking to focus a little bit. We cover a lot of topics, and I think it's great if we highlight a few that this group is going to champion. I would say if we can open the aperture a little bit regarding bike and ped, and maybe think about, to your point, best practices around more livable cities. So which would include bike and ped, and maybe we change the way we look at our streets a little bit. There's lots of good models throughout the world about cities that have kind of transitioned into a different model. And then as far as best practices for supporting climate action plans, just that we ensure that we look at transportation electrification.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this would all have a very strong transportation connection. Yeah.
I'll put a recommendation to maybe examine the feasibility of, in the long term, adopting something like a Vision Zero plan for the region. Speaking of safety metrics, I know there are lots of other regions around the country that have done this. What does the pace of those plans look like? Are these 5-year plans, 10-year plans? What would it take to get this region to achieve that kind of goal?
So maybe like some case studies around a Vision Zero type plan or something like that.
Great. Any other thoughts? I know we're over time.
It seems like we're all kind of like talking around it, but it really seems like equity is on the forefront of all of our minds when we're talking about buses and making cities livable and bikeable and walkable. But just to put it on there, equity does seem to be in the front of our mind.
Sure, yeah. Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. All right, if there's nothing else on that, I think, Jessica, we're ready to go to staff updates.
Good. So I'm going to share my screen. We were going to talk about this last time, but we ran out of time. So we will cover it quickly now. So the MPO did a bike and pedestrian count this last fall. I can't remember how much I've talked to you guys about this before, but to give a little background, the PDC has historically done bike and pedestrian counts every other year in the fall and spring. They haven't been done for about 4 years. And when I went back and looked at the data previous, there were a lot of discrepancies in how and where the data was collected previously. So it wasn't very usable in order to compare over time. So I worked with the city, the county, and UVA representatives on our bike and ped committee to figure out a better focus for the bike and pedestrian count. And what we came up with was shifting away from this like broad regional bike and ped count and towards a focus on before and after data for locations that were about to see investment in bike and ped infrastructure. So that committee came up with 10 locations where we were going to count. And these places were either going to have bike and ped investment in the near future, or they had recently had bike and ped investment. And we decided to also include those in this count because we felt that the after data alone would still be really helpful for the localities to learn from. So what we did was I came up with a brand new count sheet, and we had volunteers go out and count at each of these locations at morning and evening peak travel periods. So from 7 to 9 a.m. in the morning and from 4 to 6 p.m. And they were all counting in the last 2 weeks of October. So they were all done in this short period of time. So people counted bikes, they counted pedestrians, and before they did this, they had a one-on-one tutorial with me where I gave them like very clear definitions of what constituted a bike, what was a pedestrian, how are you counting multiple people riding like a tandem bike or anything like that. And they also collected demographic data. And this demographic data is of course a little bit subjective, because how can you tell if someone is, a woman riding by on a bike or not? You make your best guess. And what I told people was, if you're more than 50% sure that that's a woman, go ahead and make the tally mark. Same thing for our under 16 category, same thing for our non-white category, same thing for our physical disability category. And we also counted people wearing helmets, and we counted people riding the wrong way. So typically, if you're riding a bike, you're supposed to be riding in the same direction as traffic on the roadway. And people wrong way riding would be riding against traffic. And we also counted the number of bikes that were motorized that you could tell. There's a lot of electric bikes out there on the market that you can barely tell that they're electric. So if they could tell, they were counted as motorized. This is the summary sheet, but we also have the data broken down even more detailed for each location. So this is broken down. We had our volunteers break down the bicyclists and pedestrians based on how they were entering the intersection, how they were entering the location. Were they coming from the north? Were they coming from the south? This gives us really detailed information about direction of travel. And they counted by 15-minute increment. So that's why it's broken down into many, many rows here. The demographic data is not broken down by bikes or peds. It's all aggregated together. That's one thing that I've heard when I've presented this data to other groups, that they would have liked to see that data, the demographic data broken down. And that's something that we could do in the future. But I think that as it is, it's still really helpful for getting a sense of who is traveling through that intersection or traveling through that location. And it kept the count sheet as simple as possible for our volunteers. So all of this data, the grand totals, as well as all of the intersection or location specific data, that is all available on our website. We have a new bike and pedestrian transportation planning page. So you can go there, you can look at this data. The localities have it, and we will be counting these same locations again in the spring so that we have some more data over time, and hopefully we'll be including at least a little bit of funding for this in our work plan for next year, so we can continue to get this data over time that'll be useful to the localities. Any questions about this so far?
I was struck a little bit by the sort of the big differences between, let's say, Monticello and Fifth. I walk on JW Parkway in Rio. I mean, there's some that are 200, there's one that's 400. And what accounts is that? Is that work, or do you have any sense of why there's such a big discrepancy, difference? I wouldn't say discrepancy.
Like the daily totals, the differences.
Yeah, the daily totals. Yeah, that's what I was looking at.
Yeah, so keep in mind the daily totals are just a snapshot. They're just, a 4-hour collection, not necessarily even on the same day. There are weather issues that might have accounted for it, but you're also going to see major differences just partly because of the bike and pedestrian infrastructure that's there, and the population in that area, and the destinations in the area, if there's a lot of attractions for people biking and walking. I don't think that the daily totals are really the thing to focus on. I think that these grand totals are helpful for kind of getting a big picture, but the way I expect the bike and pedestrian planners and the transportation planners at the localities to use this data is to really look at the location specific data, where they can get a lot more information about the direction of travel, and a little bit more about the demographics for that particular location.
Would you all be open to opening up I know that you were reaching out, trying to find volunteers for this earlier, but opening up a midday slot to catch maybe like non-working individuals or people who telework now, who are using the streets not during commute, like regular commute hours?
No, that's a great question. And I think it's a great thing to add to future counts. While I did change a lot of things from previous counts, I was still kind of sticking to best practices for counts, and best practices are still limited by, you know, the commute focus. So that's why there's that peak travel stuff. But I really like your idea, and I think it's more important considering all of the impacts of telework.
The initial takes here, was there anything surprising that you caught or was caught from this?
One thing we were talking about is looking at, let's see, so Riverview Park was one of these locations. It's at the very top. We were really surprised to look at the demographics comparing Riverview Park to, so Riverview Park is a beautiful place to bike and walk. It's really safe because it's completely separated from any motor vehicle traffic. But if you look at the demographics compared to something like what we're looking at, I think Emmett and Angus, that's a really busy intersection. You have to cross a lot of motor vehicle lanes to access a bus stop. The reason we counted there is because there's recently been put in a shared use path down the median, and there were people who were using it. But if you go to that particular location, we also saw that people weren't using that path. They were still crossing ramps on and off the bypass to walk along the sidewalk. We were just surprised, I think, at seeing that there were a lot of children, relatively a lot of children at the Emmett and Angus location. And we just didn't see, you know, quite as many at Riverview Park, which I think was just a really big surprise for me.
Interesting.
Any other questions?
Sorry.
No? Okay, so that data is available. You can take a look at it. Yeah, and let me know if you have any additional questions by email. All right. So the other thing, and Chip kind of stole all my thunder here. So this is, I'm checking my video. This is a quick overview of the two DRPT grants that TJPDC recently received. So the first one is for a Charlottesville and Albemarle Regional Transit Vision Plan. And the purpose of that plan is for local leaders, transit agencies, and a wide variety of stakeholders to collaboratively develop a clear vision for the future of transit in our region. The work will result in a Charlottesville Area Transit Vision Plan document that will identify goals, objectives, strategies, and time-specific recommendations. The recommendations contained within the plan will be developed for short-term, long-term, and extended long-term timeframes with a horizon year of 2050. The way we wrote the application for this grant was to kind of copy what has been done in Richmond. They did a similar vision plan about a year ago or so. So you can always take a look at that if you wanted to see clearer what we're hoping to get out of this vision plan. The budget for this project is $350,000. $175,000 or half of that is coming in grant funds, and then the other remaining half will be local match split between Albemarle County and City of Charlottesville. The timeline for this project is about 18 months. So as soon as the agreements are signed to June 30th or the end of the next fiscal year. Okay, and this is a timeline just for the very next few steps for the Transit Vision Plan project. So we're currently here. We're working on signing the agreements and getting the MOUs taken care of with the city and the county. And we are finalizing our scope of work for this project and sending it out as part of our RFP to DRPT's bench contracting firms. In February, hopefully, I know people keep telling me I'm being optimistic, but I'm going to continue to be optimistic. We will have a selection committee in place who will review the proposals and select a consulting team, hopefully by the end of February. And in March, the real work will begin. So the Regional Transit Partnership will be serving as the advisory group, and they will meet with the consulting team to approve another final scope of work. So this is a scope of work that the consultants create out of the one we put in the RFP. It's like the final thing. That's the work that they're actually going to do. And that work would begin in March. So the second project that we have is the Albemarle County Transit Expansion Feasibility Study and Implementation Plan. So this is a feasibility study and implementation plan for expanded transit service to population and employment centers within Albemarle County, particularly the Pantops area, Monticello, and along Route 29 North. So this feasibility study is supposed to innovative transit options to include on-demand service that emphasize accessibility and responsiveness to customer needs should be investigated alongside traditional fixed route options. The budget for this project is just over $106,000. Half of that is coming from DRPT and the other half is coming from Albemarle County as a local match. The timeline for this project is just under 12 months. So once we get the agreement signed up until December 31st of this year, the reason that we have such a tight timeline for this one is because the implementation plan, which is like the second product that's going to be created from this project, we want that in hand so that whichever organization is going to be actually running the service can apply for funding for the next fiscal year. And they need to do that in January or February. Okay, and then lastly, looking at the timeline, again, just for the next few steps, we're in the process of signing agreements and MOUs. We are finishing up the scope and sending that off as part of our RFP. We will, in February, have our selection committee put together, and that's mostly going to be Albemarle County folks. And we will review proposals and select a consulting team. And in March, that advisory group will be set. It'll be appointed by Albemarle County, and I'll be working on that project in project management, and we'll actually get started with the work. The advisory group will meet with the consulting team to approve the scope and begin work. Okay, does anyone have any questions about those?
Just to be clear, transit means what?
Great question. I mean, I think we are thinking
scope?
we're thinking beyond just fixed route. We're thinking about anything.
Are you thinking automobiles included in that?
Do you mean ride sharing?
No, I mean just plain commuter automobiles. Is it public transportation that's...
Yes, this is public transit. This would not be personal vehicles. No.
That's what I wanted to clarify.
Okay.
Okay. The other thing I was going to mention is, Albemarle County, we have a traffic, just for your information, a traffic corridor study that's going on Rio. Are you aware that we've started that?
I'm not super aware of it.
Okay, that it might be helpful to look at that. That's going to look at, it's more traffic oriented, it's automobile, but it's going to look at sidewalks and biking paths as well. So it might be something you should just keep in back of your mind if this gets started.
Yeah, and I think that all that the consulting team, especially the one working on the transit vision plan, will be very well informed about all of the ongoing transportation studies. Any other questions?
This looks like really exciting. I had, I guess, like 2 questions.
Sure.
For the vision plan for Charlottesville and Albemarle, I was interested in what you guys were looking for in local leaders. Like who would that entail? Yeah.
So you're referring to local leaders who would be on the advisory group. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So those people are mostly going to be the people who are already on the regional transit partnership. So that's an existing group of transit leaders and elected officials from both Albemarle County and City of Charlottesville who have been, working together to think about transit for a couple of years now. And that's going to be our advisory group. They have meetings every month. Those meetings will be a time for us to discuss all of the ongoing work of the vision plan. And those meetings are open to the public. I will also, of course, make updates to CTAC, but those RTP meetings, which will be the official advisory group meetings, those will all be open to the public so people can stay informed of the process.
I have a couple. Oh, excuse me.
Go ahead, Joseph.
Thank you. Oh no, don't let me do the thing I forget. I think my Oh yes, my second question was on the focus on on-demand public transportation service as opposed to fixed route, and sort of expanding a fixed route service idea.
Sorry, can you clarify the question a little bit? You just want to know why there's the focus on demand?
Yeah. So like, what were your guys' thoughts on demand?
Yeah, so I think that wording in particular came from Albemarle County, but I want to clarify that it's not necessarily a focus on innovative transit. It's not a focus on demand. It's not a preference for on-demand service over fixed route. It is just included as a very clear way to indicate that we are interested in investigating the feasibility of it. But again, I would say that that's not necessarily the preference.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
All right.
Other questions?
Yes, I had, these are definitional again. Question about you said transit leaders and elected officials. I know what an elected official is, but I don't know what a transit leader is. Would that be somebody from CAT or some such thing?
Yep, so particularly thinking of Garland Williams, who is the director of CAT, and Karen Davis, who is the new director of JAUNT. I'm not sure if she's the official or the interim director, but the people who are like the CEOs of those organizations, of the actual operations.
Yeah, and then the other definition is stakeholder. You're meeting with stakeholders. But again, perhaps if you just list these entities, be helpful.
Yeah, so stakeholders, I think that we are going to have to do a lot of work with the consultants to identify a lot of stakeholders, but initially we're going to start with the Regional Transit Partnership and the people who regularly attend those meetings, and then we're going to broaden the stakeholder group from there to try to include the folks I can think of off the top of my head are I don't know, organizations that work with people with disabilities or the homeless or anything like that, groups that would really benefit from having their needs heard in a broader conversation about transit in our region.
Jessica, if I can too, just because I've been working with this group way longer than also included, we've got the director of the university transit system, which is, of course, a very big component of this. We also have at the table the director of Albemarle County school bus system. Of course, CAT manages the Charlottesville school bus system. And we're not nowhere because there is a very clear separation for student transportation and non, but still there could be some overlap, especially when you're talking about CTAC and other types of educational transportation or extracurricular activity transportation for students. So there may be some opportunities there. The other thing for the regional visioning plan, JAUNT, of course, represents the areas outside of Charlottesville and Albemarle. So we have some rural leaders that are at the table at Regional Transit Partnership also.
Thank you for that, Chip.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any opportunity for some type of citizen engagement where you have some open forums? Is that going to be part of it? Yes,
That's been written into our draft scope, that there will be, I can't remember if we're going for multiple public engagement sessions, as well as an interactive website where people can engage with the project.
Will the meetings for this group themselves be open to the public?
For the advisory group?
Yes, the people working on this vision plan.
The people working on the vision plan, I mean, we'll have our consulting team. The consulting team will be employees of a consulting firm, and they will do their work, behind closed doors. But their work will always be presented at public meetings of our advisory group, which is, again, the Regional Transit Partnership, and those are the public
Gotcha.
meetings.
Okay.
Yep. Any other questions?
would you think about establishing sort of a citizens, interested parties, or even this group to advise, to comment on the plan as it goes along once or twice over the course of the engagement?
Yeah, I mean, initially, and Chip, you can jump in too, because this is, partly your vision for this vision plan. Initially, I would think the citizens should be encouraged to come to our regional transit partnership meetings and offer their input there, as well as at the public engagement sessions and online and the interactive website. But like I said, I will be making updates to this group. We'll be making updates to MPO Tech and to the policy board, I'm sure. So it's gonna come up in a bunch of public meetings.
Okay.
But I definitely want to note that I'm hearing your suggestion about having some sort of public stakeholder group also be part of this process, and I'm gonna make a note and we'll see what we can do.
I would doubt that you would see any additional like appointing group or a formal group. What I think you will see a lot of is Jessica or the consultants and others coming to existing groups. So Albemarle County has community, I think they're called community action committees or something like that. Like
committees.
Yeah, we'll come present to them, or we'll come and present at the senior center, or we'll come present somewhere else. Managing one advisory committee is probably more than a full-time job. If we started doing more, I think we would we would eat up our resources very quickly. But we do intend to come out to the public a lot.
Okay, that's great.
Chip, would say a city neighborhood association be something you might be interested in presenting to?
To them, let me, we just received, I got to brag a little bit. Nick Morrison, one of our staff members, just completed a small area plan in Fifeville. And we presented to the City Planning Commission last week or the week before and got rave reviews for the public engagement. I say all of that because Nick and the group he was working with from Fifeville coined the phrase of front porch meetings. And he would go and present on a Sunday afternoon to about 4 neighbors, drinking tea on the front porch or the kitchen table. That resulted in some of the best comments that we received for the whole plan. That may very well be, from the smallest of groups to the biggest of groups.
Any other questions for Jessica? Cool.
Good. Good job, Jessica.
Thanks. Well, if people do have additional questions or comments, again, you can always email me. I'm going to try to switch my screen. Is everyone seeing a list of, it says Culpeper on the side. Is everyone seeing that?
Still the vision plan.
No. All right. I'm just going to start over. Stopping. Chuck, I'm putting you on notice. I'm about to ask for your input here. So as I think Chip talked about earlier in our meeting, we had a lot of success with this round of Smart Scale. This is a list of projects that have been funded. It is public. Well, these have been tentatively funded. There is one more step in order for them to get officially funded. Chuck, did you want to say more?
Yeah, these were the projects that were from the 36 submitted projects across the district. These are the 20 projects that were recommended that's basically scored the highest in the evaluation process, and were recommended to the Commonwealth Transportation Board for consideration for funding for this round of Smart Scale, and that process will be taken up over the next several months with them on through discussions with our CTB members. And if then basically in June, they would approve the 6-year plan, and whatever projects these projects will be on that 6-year plan. And like I said, we're going through right now, and we're scheduling meetings with the CTB members over the period of the next month. And we'll be sitting down with Allison DeTaunt as our representative to go through these and see if there's anything that she wants to change. There is some outstanding balances, I think, in the district grant program. These were funded out of 2 pots of money. There's a statewide pot of money and a district grant pot of money. With the omnibus bill that was passed a year or 2 ago, that funding was just identified and added to the budget. So we actually got an additional $87 million in funding for this particular round of Smart Scale, which allowed us to fund much more projects than we normally get. Normally we get about 20 million, and we usually get about somewhere between 6 and 10 projects.
Yeah. Chuck, could we get a copy of the remaining 16 and how they scored? Will that be available soon?
It is available on the Smart Scale website.
I can get it.
You can pull it down as an Excel spreadsheet or a PDF, and it has all the scoring breakdowns for every project across the state.
Thank you.
So that's
So if
the
anyone-
process for this moving forward. Anybody else have any questions?
So these basically are the ones you think will most likely get approval, this first page, just to repeat and be sure I understood.
My understanding is yes. I mean, like I said, this is what was submitted. I'm at the CTB meeting. It's the first time I'd seen the list as well. So normally the process is we work with the CTB member, and then they decide which projects they want to fund. So if a locality doesn't want to fund a project, say they submitted 2 projects and they want to fund the other project, there is she has the ability to switch some of those out if she wants to. I know last round, the city of Charlottesville had both, let's see, Preston Grady and was a project, and what was the other one?
Cherry. I think it was
Cherry
Cherry.
Ridge intersection. Yeah. And they chose to actually, Preston Grady scored higher, but they actually funded Ridge Cherry intersection improvements over Preston Grady. That was something we asked the city which one they preferred to fund. And since it didn't, from our standpoint, it didn't matter. They chose to fund Cherry Ridge Street over Preston Grady. And then the other thing is, if there's other projects that we could possibly fund, or we may shift some projects around, working with the localities and the CTB member. I don't think that's going to happen this time, because most of the projects on this list are in the MPO area, except for there's a few that were up in the northern area, and I don't think those are going to change either. So this will probably be the final list.
Thank you.
Just one item, just to draw to your attention. Number 1, because it's number 1, the hydraulic road in 29 was the highest scoring project in the Culpeper district, which we're very, very happy to see. The other thing, just as a reminder, because I know many of you have seen this already, it is not a $5.7 million project. That was the funding request we made because there was already a budget for that project of $18 million. So, this is actually a $23 million project It was only 5.7 million requested. So it's a very big project.
And that holds true for the Albemarle County projects. I think they actually put in $1 million on every one of their projects. So
wow,
those estimates are higher too.
If we were interested in checking out, say, for instance, the Hydraulic Road 29 project that went through, I saw a number of options that were being proposed. I guess it was a year ago almost now. Can we see what the end result of what was likely to be approved somewhere? Where would we find that?
I have that information. Well, I mean, are
Yeah.
you asking like what went into the actual application?
Yeah, I was wondering what of the options. I think I remember seeing like several, like from like a bike path on, like, what was that? I don't want to obviously suck up any more time, but I remember seeing multiple different options around there.
Yeah, I'll send it to Jessica and she can send it out to you all, or we can put it maybe on a Google Drive or something like that.
Whatever works. All right, thank you.
Mhm.
It should be on the website too, Sandy, as part of the study material.
I wasn't sure if that was on the public portal or not, but I'll check it out. We'll get it to you somehow.
Well, what I'm saying is, I think it's on the, it should be part of the material that we actually had as part of meeting minutes, and it should be on the places of the hydraulic, the Solutions 29 portal too.
Okay.
Great. Any other questions for Chuck?
The only other thing I wanted to comment on is, because of the way the funding was structured, we may be able to accelerate some of these projects. I'm not sure. We're not at that stage yet, but some of the funding comes online next year. So I'm not sure how that's going to play into programming these projects. And this is a lot of projects to program, but we could see some of these sooner than later.
Cool. Jessica, I think we're ready to move on if there's nothing
Great.
else.
So there is one more item I had under staff updates, and even though we are well over, I'd like to discuss it just because it seems relevant. So Marty reached out to me and made the suggestion that CTAC consider moving from meetings every other month, which, so you guys know, is the same schedule for like MPO Tech. So moving from every other month to every month, just because there seems to be quite a bit of great discussion among this group and a lot of topics that you want to cover. It is not built into our work program for this fiscal year to transition to meetings every month, but it's something that we could consider for our work program for next year, which begins in July. So I just wanted to feel out the rest of the group. How do you guys feel about potentially moving these to monthly meetings? Another thing I'd like to suggest is considering moving these meetings from an hour and a half to 2 hours every other month, which would put us at the same timeline as MPO Tech and give us a little bit more time to cover all of the great topics we've been talking about.
Yeah, I'm very much in favor of the monthly meetings, and I know Supervisor Ann Malik had made the same comment to me that we should be meeting monthly.
I support monthly as well.
And would we be looking at this? You said it wasn't in the current plans, so what would this be for 2022, or what time frame?
So this fiscal year ends on June 30th, 2021, and the next fiscal year starts on July 1st of this calendar year. So that's when we could potentially look at moving to monthly meetings.
Okay.
Any other thoughts?
Would the monthly meetings then still be the hour and a half? Would they go down to an hour?
This is all up for debate. So I think that an hour goes really, really quickly. I would be a bit hesitant to try to get everyone together, especially considering, you know, I'm very hopeful that we'll move to in-person meetings again in this calendar year, but you know, it's just something to keep in mind.
I chair a community advisory council in the county, and it's a month. It's 1.5 hours usually is what we have. I think that's an appropriate time. We meet once a month, and really we end up meeting maybe 11 meetings out of the year. It's usually between Thanksgiving and Christmas. We somehow combine one and have one meeting in that time frame, November, December. I think I found that meeting every 2 months, I lose track of what's going on. It reminds me, I think, as a couple of you have said, once a month, you get more of a continuous flow. And I think we would do better in keeping subjects on our mind and thinking about them.
Yeah, and in the last 2 meetings, you had to punt things to the meeting after because you ran out of time. So I think we certainly have enough material to do the monthly.
I'm going to be the dissenting voice here and say that I think the every other month format may work better for us who have like trouble basically securing a late night slot like this. I would much rather move to a 2-hour every other month so that if I'm making childcare plans so that I can come to a meeting eventually when they're in person, that it's not as frequent, but I can certainly make my babysitter stay longer. That's much easier than trying to secure one every month. The other thing is that there's the criteria within the membership that if you like miss so many meetings per year, right, there's a maximum number of meetings you can miss. So I think if we do move to a monthly format, then would that also have to change?
Yeah, we've been pretty lenient about it and haven't kept particularly close track on that, but yeah, it would be something to revisit. So Chip, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if we're going to make any change at all, well, if we're going to make a change to monthly meetings, we will need to amend our bylaws to do that.
Yes, and you could amend because I think it's a notice to your appointing body. If you miss X number of meetings, you could change both at the same time.
And Chip, maybe you could help me out. If we were to move to 2-hour meetings instead of 1.5 hours, that's not specified in our bylaws, so we would not need an amendment there.
Nope.
So just clarifying for everyone what would be required to make.
For me, really, I would prefer we meet every other month and increasing the time to 2 hours. But if it's convenient for the majority to meet every month, I would prefer every other month and increasing the time to 2 hours.
Already hit 2 hours a day with every other month. Jessica, can we perhaps bring this up next time for a vote? Just taking into consideration where we're at with the time.
Yeah, actually, and Chip, I'm going to look to you again on the legality of this. Can I send out a poll by email for people about how they feel about this, and we can put it on the agenda next month? But we'll at least have we'll have some numbers to back up our ideas. Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. That's what I will do. You're going to see a very full email from me following.
Before we go, can you just, for those of us who are new members, the agenda we have today is typical. Is it typical of what we usually have, or is it much longer or much shorter? I don't know.
Chip, Sandy, Lucinda, I think this is pretty typical. We often see something from the tip. We have a lot of, pretty. We have business for the MPO, and then. Yeah, this is pretty typical.
So if it is, then we can meet every other month for 2 hours. Yeah. It's just that we are making it official that it's 2 hours.
I would say that for 7 years, well, we haven't talked about it for the full 7 years, but the safety and performance measures always end up in extended discussion. It's a very confusing issue. It always runs long. If that's not on the agenda, it normally runs pretty smoothly and timely. Occasionally, the tip amendments will also run a little bit long, but it's those performance measures that are so confusing.
One thing might be helpful, Jessica, is sort of list maybe some of the things that are coming up. So as we think about it, we talked about looking over the smart scale projects. So each one of those could take a meeting, and I think it'd be a better flow to try to push them all in a 2 hour period. It get tired after a while, you get bleary eyed after a while. I do at least. So maybe you could list some of the things that you think will be coming up and give us that will maybe give us a sense of a flow of what we would be encountering over the next year.
Sure. Yeah, I think Sandy and Lucinda and I can talk and come up with a list of topics that you might be seeing in the next fiscal year.
Okay, thank you.
Well, unless people had any other comments, I'll hand it back to you, Tristan. I think that's it.
All right, I think we're ready to close out the meeting. Is that right?
Yep.
Yes.
All right, great. I don't see anybody else joining, so the matters of the public is moot. So I think we're ready to close. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
you're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Have a
Good night.